Today we are breaking down a really fascinating message from Pastor Francis ANSERE. He gave us what he called a theological lens for understanding what scripture describes as the age of social chaos. And family, this one really hits home. Pastor ANSERE began by asking a question we've all felt before. Why are human relationships so toxic sometimes? Why do our interactions, whether personal, family, church, or society, feel so strained? According to the sermon, scripture actually diagnoses the root cause of this. Pastor ANSERE showed us through the passage he preached from that these perilous times we live in are not primarily about wars, disasters, or outward dangers. He taught that the real issue is a shift in human character, a corruption of the heart. What does this age of social chaos really look like? Pastor pointed out the symptoms. The sermon referenced several visible signs. 1. Weakening institutions. 2. Breakdown in family structures. 3. A collapse of trust. 4. Everyday interactions that feel increasingly cold. Pastor ANSERE emphasized that these are not isolated issues, but symptoms of something deeper. The first layer, which is deception. According to the message, one of the strongest indicators of this age is deception, and he stressed the phrase, deceiving and being deceived. Pastor ANSERE explained the biblical term, seducer, not as someone who merely tempts, but an impostor, someone who appears one way but is different on the inside. He highlighted that scripture describes deception as something that intensifies. The pastor taught that this is a cycle. Once you practice deceit long enough, you eventually become deceived yourself. That is how mistrust multiplies. So, if deception is a symptom, what then is the disease? Here's what Pastor ANSERE brought us into the heart of the message. He explained that the real issue is an internal shift in worship. The sermon showed that what you love most is what you truly worship, and the rise of self-worship is the root of the chaos we see. Scripture contrasts two groups. 1. Lovers of God, and 2. Lovers of pleasure. Pastor ANSERE defined godlessness not as atheism, but as a willful rebellion against God's ways, that is replacing his standards with your own. How does internal decay spread outwards? He taught that all of them flow from this self-worship, that this is how an individual heart condition becomes a cultural condition. Pastor walked us through the 90 negative traits listed in the passage from Timothy. The progression looks like this. Personal decay, that is pride, greed, and arrogance. Relational decay, which is broken families, disloyalty, and betrayal. And the last one, societal decay, false accusers, corruption, and moral collapse. One of the most striking points he made was about lawlessness. The sermon referenced Jesus' words, when lawlessness increases, the love of many will grow cold. Pastor ANSERE explained that lawlessness isn't just crime. It is the rejection of any shared moral standard. And without shared standards, love cannot survive. It withers because there's nothing to protect it. So, what is the alternative to this? To contrast lawlessness, the message introduced covenant, a binding mutual commitment filled with moral structure. Pastor ANSERE taught that love flourishes when it is protected by covenantal standards, not when everything is left to personal preference. Unregulated love doesn't last. That was one of the strongest lines of the sermon. Pastor ANSERE ended by shifting our attention away from external threats. He reminded us that wars, famines, plagues, are not our greatest danger. The real threat is internal. The decay of character, the rise of lawlessness, the weakening of moral conviction, and the abandonment of God's ways. And so, he left us with this question: can a society truly love, trust, or function without a shared moral law? Is a deep question worth reflecting on.